So, welcome everybody. Does that work in the microphone? It doesn't pick it up. Welcome everybody. It's really wonderful to see so many faces here. I'm sure some of you are experts in mindfulness and have a daily practice, and I'm sure there are some of you here who have absolutely no idea what's about to happen. So welcome to everybody. This workshop is a collaboration of a group of people. A couple of months ago, a colleague of mine approached me because she had met Miriam, who's right here. She'd met her at a drinks, and Miriam coaches people using mindfulness. And my colleague said, I think that's something really, really useful for students and PhDs. Can we do something at the university? And about 1 week later, Clarche, who I've also lost sight of, approached another colleague of mine, Micah, and said, I'm really interested in putting together a program that's called Mindfulness in Law. And the conversation started, and it seems like by the number of people here in the room that the conversation is really ready to happen. Speaking about mindfulness in our daily lives, but particularly about what that can mean for us as law students, law teachers, law academics, law professionals, and there are some professionals in the room with us today as well. So it's wonderful that you've all come here and that we have Charles Halpern, who's joined us from UC Berkeley, on his own cost, I might add, because he's really enthusiastic to share with us about the program he's been running there for quite some time. So we're going to be here for 2 hours. We're going to have a break in the middle. If anyone doesn't yet have a sheet of paper with some materials on it, they're available. And at the end, if anyone did not sign up to be here today via our registration and would like to hear more about what's going to be happening, we'll have a sheet circulating that you can write your email address on. So keep those things in mind. But first of all, I'd like you to welcome Charles Halpern for us to the University of Amsterdam.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Can you all hear me? Good. I'm very happy to be here, in part to see so much interest in the Netherlands in the subject of mindfulness in law. It's very heartening to me. There's quite over the last 15 years, there's been a substantial development of interest in this area in the United States. I teach at the University of California at Berkeley Law School, which has a really vibrant and active program exploring this subject, teaching it to students, working with faculty members, working with alumni, working with lawyers and judges in practice. And we're starting to just reach out internationally with this work, and I'm delighted to see that it's already happening here, and that there are people who see this as interesting. When I started doing the mindfulness and law work almost 20 years ago, it seemed like it was a real stretch for people. At that time, not so many people knew about mindfulness or meditation. It seemed more exotic and something that happened in monasteries or in religious settings. The idea that meditation and mindfulness, the mindful state of awareness, could be useful to professionals was not widely understood. We did our first retreat, a 3-day retreat, mindfulness retreat at Yale Law School in 1998. And the students who came were interested but deeply skeptical. And we had to start from the very starting point about what this work is all about. And it turned out to be a very successful and influential retreat as word spreads out about these things. But the world has changed dramatically since those days, and now there is mindfulness is something which is featured on the covers of popular magazines in the United States. Stories are published in the largest newspapers on the front page, and there's a lot of that going on. So when Clarche Freke emailed me, excuse me, I'm from a different era, and I still think first of the telephone and being called, but of course, it wasn't that. When Clarche first emailed me and expressed her own interest in combining her law practice and her contemplative practices, and seeing if that could be done. She went online and discovered this program at Berkeley Law School and contacted me by email. And my wife and I were looking for a good reason to come back to Amsterdam, where we hadn't been for decades, and this was it. So we've combined visits. We're so pleased to see that they have redone the Rijksmuseum in such a stunning way, and I'm glad that your tax-paying euros did it, not mine. But it's very exciting. It's very exciting for us to see. So what I propose to do, for the last 6 years, I've been teaching a course for 2 credits, a seminar at Berkeley Law School called Effective and Sustainable Law Practice, the Meditative Perspective. Effective and Sustainable Law Practice. See, the title of the course is making the claim that mindfulness practice is going to make people more effective in doing law work, and also that it's going to make law work more sustainable. That the kind of tension and stress that drives many lawyers into deep professional dissatisfaction, and in the worst cases into substance abuse and depression, can be alleviated by people who have these kinds of skills. So it makes, we hold out the possibility, at least, that mindfulness practice can make people more effective and make law work more sustainable. And we do this by developing the meditative perspective. But before I say more, I'd like to get a little sense of who we all are here. So I want to ask 2 sets of questions, and I'd like a show of hands for each. First, how many people here are lawyers or judges? Do prosecutors count? Prosecutors definitely count. Prosecutors count. Thank you. And how many people here are law students? And how many people are law teachers? And how many people are other? Well, welcome to you all. Now I want to ask another set of questions. The first is, and it relates to your experience with mindfulness meditation and other contemplative practices. And we're not going to go into the definition of what's a contemplative practice and what's not. You define it for yourself. It might be long-distance swimming was your contemplative practice, and that counts. So how many people here have an extensive experience with contemplative practices? Don't be modest. How many people have a more limited experience, but some experience of contemplative practices? And how many people have no experience at all? Don't be shy. You can put your hands right up. Wonderful. Well, that's wonderful. It's a nice mix of people and a nice mix of experiences. That's great. I should tell you that in the world of mindfulness practice, the state of being a beginner, having a beginner's mind, is considered to be a particularly advantageous place to be, because it means that you're not already, your mind isn't limited by some categorical knowledge that you're holding that limits the possibilities of seeing more broadly. So those of you who are coming here in a state of beginner's mind, I give you a particular welcome. So what I want to do to start, particularly with the thought in mind that there's some people who haven't done this kind of work before, is to give you a sample of the contemplative practices that I use to frame the teaching I do during my seminar at Berkeley Law. So Berkeley, I've met one person who actually has an LLM from Berkeley Law. Are there others who have been to that place? We do something there that you probably wouldn't want to do. Our semester is 13 weeks long, and we start with a kind of movement meditation called Qigong, which is a very elaborated and ancient Chinese practice for working with the energy of the body and the energy that surrounds the body. We do it as a way of developing a kind of moving meditation. I think it's particularly helpful because people arrive in the classroom often rather frazzled and worn out from a day of activities. We do it in the afternoon. From their mornings in the law school, racing around, finishing up their assignments, the anxiety of going into the classroom if they're not as well prepared as they'd like to be. There's a lot of anxiety and all of that. So it's a way to let go of that. Now, because it is Berkeley, we don't just do our moving practice in the classroom as we're going to do it today. Because it's Berkeley, we do it at one end of the law school is a grove of redwood trees and eucalyptus trees. So we go out and do our Qigong practice, as it should be done, outdoors, under the trees and under the skies, which are bluer more often than they're gray. I don't want to make any comparisons, but it is true that most of those 13 weeks we can do it outdoors and with considerable comfort. But we'll do it indoors here. And then I would like to do our sitting practice. I'll do a kind of guiding practice that shouldn't put off anyone, even the experienced practitioners, although they might prefer me to talk less. But for people who are new to it, a guiding voice is often very helpful, offering instructions and guidance. So that's what I would like to do. Two other things I want to make clear at the beginning. One is, I'd like to say a word about the machine that is probably accompanying many of you, right? First of all, please, if you have one and it isn't turned off, please turn it off. And I want to emphasize that this isn't just a matter of keeping your neighbors from the nuisance of having some music played in their ear, but it's also a way of signaling each of us our commitment to be here in this room, paying attention to what's going on here, and not connected not connected with a live link to the world outside. One of the reasons that mindfulness is so important today is because of these things. When I started meditating, which was 35 years ago, life wasn't so distracted. It was much easier. You know, you didn't have this constant temptation to see if your friends somewhere else are doing something that's more interesting, or just to keep up with your email. But now it's a kind of a constant thing. So I think an important thing that mindfulness does today is to help us distance ourselves from these important, valuable aids, which when they stop being aids and start to take over our lives, then they become a different thing. So this is something that we'll be doing here. The other thing is I want to invite you right now to treat this 2-hour period we had together to be in its entirety a time of mindfulness. And by that, what I mean is that I want you to be here with your full self and your full attention. You may have plans for what you're going to do for dinner or what you're going to do this evening or what you're going to do over the next weekend, but when your mind races ahead or moves ahead and starts to occupy those times and those spaces, I want to encourage you to gently bring your attention back into this room, into this place, into this moment. And do that throughout our 2 hours here together. So we're going to be truly here together. I don't know what it's like to teach in an ordinary law school class in Holland. But in the United States, no professor knows how many people sitting in the seats are paying any attention whatsoever to what she or he is saying. Once that screen is open, the person standing up here has no idea where you are. And that's a strange thing. And to my way of thinking, it is not conducive to the educational process. It wasn't like that because we didn't have these things, you know. We only had pencils and papers when I went to law school. So let's try, each of us, to be fully present here. And when your mind wanders, as it surely will, this is getting a little boring. This isn't exactly what I thought it was going to be like, and and then that starts a train of associations to where you wish you had decided to go at 4 o'clock. So when you see that happening, don't judge yourself, don't criticize yourself, but just say, oh, I see these thoughts arising, let them go. Don't push them away. Let them go and come back here to what's going on in this room. So those are the introductory things I want to take care of. And now, just because I think it is a good thing to center ourselves in our bodies. Too much of the lawyer's work and the law student's study takes place from here up. We're trying to get into our bodies as we do this practice and remind ourselves that we want to stay in our bodies. So I want to encourage you all to find a place where you can get this much space around you. It's not going to be easy. There's side aisles, and there's this front row here. So it's not a whole lot of space, but it's this much. And there's some very good spots up here, very good spots in the front row. And if you're a man wearing a suit coat or a sport coat, if you're comfortable taking it off, you might want to do that. And if you're wearing shoes that are elevating you significantly off the floor, you might want to slip them off. Because we want to emphasize that we're connecting ourselves to the earth. Take a few deep breaths. Feel the weight of your upper body flowing down through the spine into the pelvis, down through your legs into your feet. Feel the way the weight is carried down through the building, and visualize your weight going down deep into the earth. Your spine upright, relaxed, but alert. Your shoulders relaxed. Your arms hanging loose from the shoulder joints. Elbows slightly flexed. Wrists soft. Feel your fingers suspended from the palms of your hands. A light pull of gravity on your fingertips. You might want to let your eyes fall shut or keep them open, but kind of a soft, unfocused gaze, kind of looking downward, and also looking up to observe the motions the movements I'm about to lead. Connect with the breath. Don't breathe in any particular way, but just observe the breath. Feel the expansion of your rib cage with the in-breath, the contraction with the out-breath. If the mind wanders, gently bring it back to the body and to the breath and to the present moment. You can lightly scan with your attention through the body and check and see if there are any places that feel tense or tight. Maybe the muscles across your shoulders. Maybe in your cheeks or the hinges of your jaws. Fully relaxed, fully at ease, fully alert. Now I'll introduce you to a few of the movements we do. First, waving hands by the side of the lake. The in-breath, let your hands float up effortlessly. Out-breath, down. In-breath, up. No effort. Stand for a moment in the standing meditation posture. Spine upright and relaxed. Knees slightly flexed. You can visualize a cord that goes from the crown of the head to the roots of the sky. And visualize that cord as holding your body upright so that you stand upright but effortless. Opening the heart at the top of the mountain. In-breath, long and slow. Out-breath, letting your weight sink. In-breath, up. Out-breath, down. Again, let your hands float up slowly. And open wide, opening the heart center. Two more. In-breath. Letting your hands float up. Open the heart center. And center. Left hand above, right hand below. Your hands just in front of the energy center of the body, the hara or dantian. With the out-breath, the left palm to the sky, right palm to the earth. In-breath. Reverse the hands. Out-breath, right palm to the sky, left palm to the earth. In-breath. Keeping your awareness in the movement, in the breath, in the body. In the flow of energy. Try to be aware of the energy as it flows through the body. One more. Left hand up, right hand down. And center. The marriage of sun and moon. The left hand, fingers extended, rises. The moon. The right hand, fingers closed, the sun. The marriage of sun and moon. Return to your seats. Try to hold on to this sense of focused embodiment. Does anyone have any questions or comments about these practices before I go on and talk some more about the themes of the day? Then I'm going to invite you to adopt a comfortable posture for sitting meditation. Feet solidly planted on the ground. Resting your hands comfortably in your lap, on the thighs, hands crossed or palms up or palms down. Get into a comfortable posture that you feel you can occupy for about 10 minutes or so without moving. Spine upright, feeling your head resting on top of the column of the vertebrae. You can let your eyes fall shut if that's comfortable for you, or just maintain an unfocused gaze on the desk in front of you or the back of the person sitting in front of you. But just, you're directing your gaze inward at this point. Feel the way the body feels after we've done our introductory Qigong movements. And connect with the breath. Paying close and subtle attention to each in-breath and each out-breath. Being aware of that point in time when the in-breath ends and the out-breath begins. And the out-breath ends and the in-breath begins. You might become aware of some sounds in the room or outside the room. Perhaps mechanical sounds. The audible breathing of someone sitting near you. Perhaps the sound of your own breathing. Observe those sounds with interest and let them go. Bringing your attention back into the body, back into the breath, back into this moment. If you become aware that your mind has wandered off, that thoughts have taken your attention to some distant place and distant time, that your mind is falling into patterns of judgment and criticism, perhaps self-judgment and self-criticism, two of the most deeply ingrained mental practices for lawyers and law students. Observe those thoughts with interest and curiosity and without judgment. And gradually bring your attention back to this moment. Not trying to push thoughts away or making a large effort to clear the mind. Just being present in this moment with what is. Let your breath be an anchor that holds your attention in the present moment. In the last few minutes of our sitting together, I invite you to bring into awareness a feeling of gratitude. Gratitude to the organizers of this meeting for bringing us all together. Gratitude to the other people who have taken time off their busy schedules to be here. And gratitude to yourself for taking the time out of your schedule to explore your mind and body and profession in a new way. In a moment, I'll sound the bell 3 times. And on the 3rd time, slowly open your eyes and return to our circle. Anyone have any comments or questions on that practice? I should say that there are many different forms of meditation, many different practices. And this is one that we've chosen and is widely used for people who are doing the mindfulness and law work, in part because it's a relatively simple practice to learn. Simple but not easy. And also because it is a mode of meditation that's available to people of any faith or of no faith.
Because I have a feeling I wasn't the only one in the room, I was tempted to fall asleep. So my whole day is busy and fast and running, and to take a moment to be that quiet and calm and inner reflecting, my temptation is just to want to sleep.
I assume she's not the only person in the room who had that experience. We're toward the end of a long day, the energy levels are low. We try to pick them up a little with the Qigong. But this is a reality of meditation practice. Just think about it. You're suddenly moving out of your noisy, active, engaged world and into this world of stillness. Your eyes are shut. You're in a comfortable position. The brain says, "Oh, I know what this is all about," and so there's this strong impulse to fall asleep. One of the approved meditation postures is horizontal. It's a practice that I never engage in because as soon as I do that and come do this kind of inward practice, I'm gone. When we're sitting, what we try to do when sleepiness arises is we observe it. Sleepiness is arising. And we have a little understanding for ourselves because, as I say, it's not surprising that the brain becomes confused about what you're calling on it to do. And so it's to be expected. You observe it. You try to let it go. You bring your attention back into the body and the breath and the moment. And very often, the moment of sleepiness passes. One of the things we learn as we do this practice is that things go through our mind incredibly fast. We don't call the ideas in. We don't invite them in. They just come. And then they go. And you think, I've got this repeating thought in my mind, it's never going to go away. And then 30 seconds later, it's gone away. Similarly, sleepiness often has that same trajectory. It comes and it goes. There are techniques to deal with it, like opening your eyes. Often that wakes people up. And another thing is stand up. It's not impossible to fall asleep standing up, but it's much less likely. So you stand up for a while. When the sleepiness passes, then you sit down again. But it is certainly an important issue. I always avoid having a meditation session scheduled for right after lunch. Any other questions or comments or reflections?
Why did you start? So this is to help people here, but also so it's on the recording.
So why would you start with Qigong? why you start your practice? Do you start your practice always with Qigong or something else?
That is my daily practice too. I always start with Qigong and then with the sitting practice. And I do it because it helps me get centered in my body, and it seems like a less discordant, less jarring to go from the fast pace of my regular life directly into silent sitting. For some people, it may not work. I do think it's a good idea to combine some kind of movement practice. It might be yoga. For many people, it's yoga. To combine some moving practice with a sitting practice. Some do one first, one second. But there's room for a lot of experimentation to see what suits you. Many people prefer to sit cross-legged on a cushion, the traditional Buddhist posture. People who have knees that are well suited to that practice often find that very satisfactory. I find it very unsatisfactory. And also, some people, what I do is sit in a chair. My normal practice is sit in a chair, but not using the back of the chair, but to sit with my spine straight. But again, the time in which one meditates and the particular practices that one uses and the order in which they use them is really a matter to experiment with and find what works for you. One more question or comment?
I just wonder how this works with physics, because mostly adrenaline has a positive effect on functioning and concentration. So how does this, maybe breaking with the adrenaline rush, work for concentration and other such?
That's an interesting question. I don't know much about the function. I have to admit, I don't know much about the function of adrenaline in the body. I have a kind of an intuitive feeling that we're tapping into a different kind of energy source. And again, as I say, I don't know much about physiology. But it seems to me that the adrenaline energy is different from the kind of energy that we're practicing Qigong with, or that we're tapping into and that's supporting our meditation practice. It's a good question. I'm sorry I don't have a good answer. Okay, let me talk, say, till 5:05 with some general reflections about meditation and mindfulness, its general utility, and then zero in on the particular value it has for people who are either working in law or studying law. And also, I'll say a word or two at the end about how mindfulness practice and the accompanying ideas that go with mindfulness practice, and the accompanying worldview that goes with mindfulness practice might also help not only the work of the lawyers, but also the effectiveness of the judicial system, the legal system generally, and how we might use this as an unexpected doorway into efforts to build a more just society. First of all, a bit of history. I've suggested some of this already. Probably until the 1960s, meditation practice was generally seen as something that takes place in monasteries and in religious settings. Buddhism is, I think, the religion most generally identified with meditation, and they probably have been the most effective in really studying deeply and elaborating on meditation processes. But there are meditation traditions in Christianity and Islam and Judaism among the ones that I'm familiar with. I think it's hard to imagine a religious practice that doesn't involve some kind of contemplative practice of the kind we've been thinking about today. I think that certainly the first time that I'm aware that meditation was taken out of that world was in the 1960s, when many people identified with the 60s revolution became engaged with Zen practice and with other kinds of mindfulness meditation traditions. In the United States, the poet Allen Ginsberg, the Beats around Jack Kerouac, a wonderful California poet named Gary Snyder, went deep into Zen practices, and their meditation practice showed up in their poetry or in their artwork or the view of life. And that was the time of, it kind of spread out from that. There was a very popular book in the United States called The Zen of Motorcycle Maintenance, where somebody was talking about how a certain kind of balanced, grounded, focused presence. I read the book a long time ago. I guess that kind of balanced, contemplative presence made people better motorcycle repairmen. I think that was the thesis. But basically, the idea was to take this way of practicing and exploring and studying the potential, the human potential, and taking it out of the monastery into secular settings. Probably goes back there. Some of my teachers during that period joined the Peace Corps in the United States, and they ended up in forest monasteries in southern Thailand. And they came back in the early 70s with these practices and with a desire to make them available to other people. And many of these, the people who had been those spiritual explorers would be familiar to those of you who know the meditation world. A man first called Richard Alpert and later in life called Ram Dass, probably familiar to some of you. Joseph Goldstein, the founder of the Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts, and a number of others. And then they started to make this available to other people. The next stage, I think, is when it started to be taken specifically into secular mainstream institutions in the way that we've been talking about doing it in law. And the pioneer, I think, in that systematic effort was a man named John Kabat-Zinn, who started bringing, he took these practices and recast them. While he was himself a very intense and devoted Buddhist practitioner, he took them into a secular form, something he called mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is now, and he started mindfulness-based stress reduction. The focus was on this as a way to relieve stress, and at a time when doctors and the medical establishment were just coming around to recognize that stress was a foundational condition for everything from high blood pressure to the things that are related to that, coronary disease and stroke, for example. So reducing stress was just emerging as an important matter. And Kabat-Zinn also started the first mindfulness-based pain management clinic at the University of Massachusetts. This proves also to be a very effective way. So this was really quite a dramatic departure, and it got a lot of publicity in the United States. And now, in the United States, probably most of the large hospitals and medical centers offer these courses. It's an 8-week course, mindfulness-based stress reduction courses, and it's offered to health professionals at all levels, and it's offered to patients as a way for them to manage otherwise intractable and unmanageable conditions. At about that time, a group of us was meeting and talking about the developments of mindfulness and meditation, and talking about bringing them into other disciplines, other professions, other ways of life. And we ended up starting something called the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society. Contemplative mind, that is meditative practices and other contemplative practices, in society, not in the monastery, not in our own private meditation practice, but to bring them out into society with the idea that these practices and these qualities which they cultivate and encourage could have major social significance and influence. So it was in that wave of things, which was really going on in the 1990s, with our work at Center for Contemplative Mind. We set up a fellowship program so that people in whatever discipline, teaching in colleges and universities, could get a fellowship to introduce contemplative practices into their work. Mindfulness and comparative literature, mindfulness and sociology, mindfulness in the history of medieval France. And our expectation was that there would be some people who had a meditation practice who were teaching, but the meditation practice and the teaching had been kept separate. And that if we would make a relatively modest fellowship come together, they would be nourished and encouraged to bring these two parts of their lives together. So, it was one of those gambles. We didn't know. It was like this meeting that we planned today. We didn't know whether we would have 10 people here or 100. And we didn't know whether we would have any applicants for this fellowship. And in fact, in our first year, we had over 100. And really interesting things. It was as if there had been some kind of a pent-up demand or an interest there, an inchoate interest. Nobody could put their words around it. And we did it rather artfully so that we made sure that the people who wanted to teach these courses would have the support of their deans or provosts in offering the course. So when they applied, they had to have a signed statement from the dean or the provost that this course, if it's developed and if they have enough student interest, will be offered. So it worked, and it's well over 100 of those fellowships were given out, and many of those programs are thriving today, because in a way the world has caught up with this. At that same time, in the 90s, I talked about the humanities and the social sciences, but the natural sciences were really starting to pay attention to what is now called contemplative neuroscience. So that prior to, say, 1985, there were a handful of articles published in scholarly journals about the physiology and the behavioral consequences from a psychological point of view of meditation and other contemplative practices. It hardly existed. And it wasn't, an academic who wanted to really focus on this area was really risking her or his academic future because it was kind of out there. It's changed quite radically, and if you went to the basic indices that analyze these, that collect these kinds of publications, there are thousands of these articles now, coming from major research centers, from Harvard, from Pennsylvania, from UCLA, to name 3 of the outstanding American centers where this work is going on. But this is now a well-understood scientific phenomenon. Also, fortunately, this ancient practice was met by a 21st century technology, which makes it really, really relatively easy to study what the brain is doing when you are actually sitting in meditation, what we were doing. There are lots of, first they started with Tibetan monks who had been meditating for tens of thousands of hours. And there are pictures of them, I guess probably in the 80s, wearing these array of electrodes on their heads, and their breath is being monitored. And of course, they have abilities to concentrate and to focus and to retain a kind of equanimity even when they're confronted with frightening or alarming stimuli, photographs of torture and other horrors. They have an ability to be attentive and present and not immediately fly off into some kind of emotional state of saying, no, I can't stand this, or I hate this and I hate those people. The kind of reactive. Instead of those kinds of reactions, they can do this and retain equanimity. And more recently, they've been doing this kind of testing with people who have done the 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course and finding major consequences, changes in the structure and function of the brain, changes in behavior. Less stress, I find in my own course, just anecdotally, that the students I'm teaching report that their anxiety levels are dropping. People, I don't know what it's like here, but the study of law, particularly now as the professional opportunities for lawyers are contracting, there's a huge amount of stress in law study. And I was rather startled by that, actually, how pervasive it is, including among students who are doing extremely well at an elite law school like Berkeley. Still stressed out, incredibly self-critical and self-judging, and anxious. And they report to us in class. All our classes, there's a rule of confidentiality to encourage people to speak candidly about their experiences. And they report that some of them have dropped their anxiety medication. Some of them are just talking about how they're just more relaxed and more comfortable in class. One student I had in his third year of law school, his final year of law school, had never spoken once in class. Very unusual, the way law school classes are taught. It's very much a participatory thing. This guy had such anxiety, he had never once spoken. And he came into class one day and he said he had volunteered in one of his large lecture classes that day. Incredible. Incredible. So that is... And the science is, we actually are now doing a questionnaire. We work with a neuroscientist on the Berkeley faculty. So she's designed a questionnaire that we give before our 13-week course starts and after the 13-week course ends. And of course, we only have 20 students in the class, so it's nothing that's statistically significant. But it is, to me, startling to see how much improvement there is in things like capacity to focus, anxiety levels, ability to suspend judgment, to not just immediately fly off with a quick judgment, but instead to be more responsive than reactive. I don't know how that translates into Dutch, but if it does at all. But reactive means, you're confronted with something which makes you angry or makes you afraid or what have you, and you just react immediately in a kind of a non-mindful way. Or a response, where you take a few breaths and then respond in a way which reflects more of a balance of judgment, of emotion and analysis. And respond with your full self. Now let's just think about what this means for lawyers. These traits and qualities for lawyers, for judges, for law students. First of all, the reduction of stress means that you're going to perform better, and that you're going to be, of course, in better health, because stress makes you sick. Above a certain point, I don't mean to say that all stress is bad or that all stress can be escaped. All stress is not bad, and all stress can't be escaped. It's part of living. Certainly, living in our complicated society and living in a profession which has stress built into it. But the excesses of stress, to be able to manage stress and not be taken over by it, is something that is extremely important for lawyers. Think of presenting an argument to the highest appellate court, and if you can go there and be present in that courtroom and grounded and in your body, with a calm, equanimous mind, what a wonderful thing that is, rather than being trembling and full of anxiety. When I started my meditation practice, I was the dean of a new law school. This is quite a while ago. But I had the extraordinary opportunity to actually start a new law school. And not only to start it, but it was supposed to be a law school that was training public interest lawyers, people who had a particular commitment to serving the public interest. And we were invited to think through the traditional law school curriculum and redesign it if we chose to. A wonderful job. And incredibly difficult. And we only had a year to recruit a faculty, to recruit students, to design this fantastic new curriculum, which wasn't going to look like any other law school's curriculum. And we did it in the City University of New York, which is an underfunded municipal university, and I was working in one of the most conservative, hidebound, and corrupt parts of New York City. So I had a lot of stress. A friend of mine said, well, why don't you try meditation? And I said, what good will that do me? And he said, try it. He gave me the kind of simple instructions I gave you. I started to do it in the morning, and I found fairly quickly that it wasn't doing any magic for me, but it was making it easier. It made it easier for me to retain some equanimity in this work I was doing, and to get a way to handle the stress. So when the phone was ringing with a call from the chancellor of the university telling me he wanted some powerful politician's son admitted to my law school, which I thought of as my law school, not his law school, I wouldn't just freak out and get into an angry confrontation, but I would be able to sit and stay with us and come back to that quiet place that some of us reached for a few minutes as we were doing our sitting practice, and then proceed from that quiet place into a process of that was more productive, shall we say. And one of the things one of the early benefits I started to gather from my practice was around the question of self-judgment and self-criticism that I mentioned here. Because I was, like so many lawyers are, really a master at self-criticism. And to be able to go easier on myself, I was developing a kind of a compassionate relationship to everybody else except myself. And so what the meditation practice allowed me to do was to bring myself into that circle of empathy and compassion. So I wouldn't expect perfection. Just as we don't expect to be able to sit with an absolutely clear mind for 10 minutes, much less for 10 hours, we don't expect that. We're okay with it. So similarly, I could be okay with acknowledging some of the mistakes I was making in doing my work. Wonderful things. Specific legal tasks can be done better from a place of mindfulness. I mentioned the person making an oral argument before an appellate panel. But just think about an ordinary relationship between a client and a lawyer. A lawyer who is sitting there mindfully paying focused attention to what the client is saying. Fully present for that client. Not thinking about the next client or about the court appearance that afternoon or the brief that has to be filed the next day, but being present with that client. It's a wonderful thing. And or a lawyer in a negotiation session, perhaps with multiple parties, multiple clients and multiple attorneys, complicated facts, and being able to stay centered, aware of all aspects of the process, having some empathetic connection with the other people in the process so that you have some sense of what their real interests are in this negotiation, what you can give on and what you can't give on in order to get a certain result. So there are concrete ways in which we can be more effective. Something that many of us have found, I've talked to a lot of lawyers about this, there's also a payoff in terms of creativity. The meditative practice gives us a little more distance from our ideas and our commitments. It gives us a little bit of the beginner's mind back, so that when we're faced with a novel problem, we don't immediately put it into a pigeonhole and say, well, this is a tort case, and there's a last clear chance doctrine and comparative liability, or I don't know what the Dutch doctrines would be, and just pigeonhole, pigeonhole, pigeonhole. Instead, we have more spaciousness, and we can think about what are creative possibilities for solutions. And all of these things in the aggregate, I believe, in ways we can talk about later during the question period, have the potential for leading to more justice and more humanity in our legal system, in our legal careers, and in the larger society. Because lawyers and the work they do and the system that they staff and generate and shape really do shape the society in a very deep and fundamental way. So those are a few thoughts that I wanted to share with you. I suggest that we take a 5-minute break, no more than that, but 5 minutes, and then come back here and we'll have an opportunity for me to present a little more, but mostly for us to have a discussion and a conversation about this subject and how it might evolve in the Netherlands. Thank you. 5 minutes. Oh, one last thing. I want to encourage you, again, by way of experiment, during this 5-minute break, I want you to take it in a mindful fashion. That means be attentive, be present. You might talk to each other. In my class, we often take silent breaks. But talk in a mindful way, where you're giving attention to what you're saying, where you're giving real, full, present attention to what others are saying to you. Thank you. So, quarter past the hour, let's get together.
vraagje. Mag je misschien nog 2 van die biertjes voor ons?
So welcome back. Please take your seat in a quiet and mindful manner. There's a few things I would like to speak about before I give the floor back to Charles. The first is most of you had registered through the event site that we had online. Still, we would like to ask, I'm just going to send this piece of paper around the room. We'd just like to ask everyone who would like to write down their email address, and if there's room, just by the side, whether you're a student or a professional, what your job is. Because the point of today is not just to have a one-off workshop. The point of today is to gather and gain as much as we can from Charles's experience, but also really to build a community around mindfulness in law. So since the last couple of weeks, under the guidance of Clarce and Miriam, we've been running a circle of it's professionals in law. So there's some judges, some lawyers, some law teachers sitting in a meeting just once a week to practice mindfulness and to talk about what it means in our profession. After this workshop, in the next couple of months, we haven't got the exact dates yet, we'll be offering a course for students only, two groups of 20. So it's going to be sort of like a pilot. If there's enough interest or more than enough interest, then we'll be able to continue and offer this course every semester, and we hope to more and more students. To those of you who are PhDs in the room, because I know there's a lot of you here, and I know there's a very big issue around the stress and the pressure we put ourselves under, I actually have an article that may be of particular interest also to students about the self and self-trust and academic failure. What is it to fail academically, and what we make that mean about ourselves? We're going to put together a separate group just for PhDs. Again, we don't have dates yet, but it will be sometime in the near future. It's possible we may need to ask for a small contribution towards it, because the faculty, as everybody knows, is really struggling financially. But we're going to put that together as a separate group. For signing up for the students groups, we will send some information out in the near future about those dates and about how you can sign up. So please just give us your email address, and if there's room down the side, just say student or advocaat or whatever your job is. And I'll announce this at the end as well. There'll be an opportunity for us to meet again after this, because there's some people in particular you should be speaking to if you're interested in taking part in that regular gathering that we have, or really being part of the mindfulness community. So there'll be an opportunity to connect a bit as well after this. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I want to, well, first, why don't we just sit for a minute or two, just to get settled in again, to get refocused, rebalanced, reconnected. Reconnecting with the breath, with the body, refocusing our attention in the present moment. Reconnecting with our sense of gratitude for our being here together. Questions or comments?
I think what I'm curious of is after today, after this workshop, if everyone goes out and thinks, well, I know what mindfulness in law is. I sort of question that, actually. You gave us already a lot of information, but if we walk out of this room and people ask us, so what did you learn? What is mindfulness in law? What should we say?
A very good question, thank you. First of all, I want to emphasize that mindfulness is something that you learn about, not by listening to a lecture or reading a book. It's something that you really learn about by practicing. So we've had even for people who had never heard of mindfulness before, you've had a little exposure to the concepts. But you've got to get below the concepts into the experience. Well, you've had a little exposure to that too. And that's a very good thing. But I want to emphasize the importance of the practice and really of a regular practice. Just doing it once every couple of months when you are feeling really whacked out or just have the time on your hands is not so good a practice. But if you need to say, if you're going up in the as we say in the United States, in the elevator, and you only have a minute between the floor you get on and the floor where you get off, and somebody says, "What have you been up to?" and you want to tell them about mindfulness in law. I would put a couple of thoughts together. One is, it's about mindfulness in law is about bringing together techniques for looking inward and exploring who we are and how our minds work, together with the work we're doing with lawyers, in order to make us more effective in doing our lawyer work, whether we're judges or advocates or whatever, and also to help build a more just society and to make our lives more sustainable and enjoyable. There is a set of techniques that hold that promise for us. And if one says, I'm interested in mindfulness and law, one is saying, I want to explore this intersection of these two worlds. Just a few words. Yeah.
I actually have more or less the same question, but it's quite a bold statement, isn't it, that to find a more just society. I don't know how long you have been here in Amsterdam, but only to see how people act in traffic, for instance. And I practice mindfulness and meditation every day, so I keep a more calm sense in the car driving to the office. But it's quite a statement to say that mindfulness in law can help us. I really like to believe it, but it's quite idealistic, isn't it? So how have you seen the effects in California?
It's a goal. It's an ambition. It's let me take a step back. First, I believe that interactions among lawyers and their clients and lawyers with each other in a courtroom setting or in a negotiation can be made more grounded, more mindful, more humane, more attentive to what's really at stake for the people who have a legal issue. And by doing that, just that greater attention to the human interactions that often are lost to lawyers who are focusing on the law, the deeper attention to the human dimensions of that, I think, are going in small ways. If this becomes more pervasive, in small ways, those will be creating small interactions which have a quality of mindfulness. And that is creating building blocks by which we build a more just society. Is there a guarantee? No, there's not. Is it likely to happen in our lifetime? Not in my lifetime, and probably not in yours. But it is a way of doing something now. And then we can take it beyond that. When I do a workshop for a group of judges, for example, and suggest the way that they could change the way they manage their courtroom, that is taking it to another level. You know, after one of these workshops I did, a judge came up to me and he said, in the past, I've always made it my business because we have such a big backlog. There's so much pressure on us to clear our dockets that I try, when the first witness offers the first testimony in my courtroom, I try to make a judgment as quickly as I can and decide who's right and who's wrong. He says, there's a whole other way to do that, which is to sit here and try intentionally to suspend my judgment, to wait till I've heard everything, and then take it in and respond to it. So if we have judges who change their judging practices, that would be wonderful. During the break, I talked about a project that's underway here in Holland to teach mindfulness to prisoners in prisons. And that's going on in the United States, too. It's very important. Now there's a group of us centered at Berkeley who are trying to think about how we can go through the criminal justice system from the front, from the time a policeman stops a person on the street, to the back when someone is released from detention and reintegrated into the community. How can we make that whole process one which is reflective of a mindful approach, reflective of our understanding that all of us are interconnected, and that all of us gain if people come out of prison, as they do in the United States, simply to go back in within 5 years or within 3 years. I mean, the statistics are appalling on recidivism. But instead, that we really are thinking about how we recreate whatever community damage has been done, considering what's happening to the victim so that the victim's harms are addressed, and think of the disruption of the life of a person who goes into prison and maybe has a family which is abandoned without a livelihood, and children who have lost their father for a period of time. And if we looked at the whole process and said, how could we bring a mindful sensibility to this process? Well, that would be terrific. How are the odds of getting anyone to do that? In the United States at this point, the criminal justice system is so radically dysfunctional that it's one of those historic moments where something's, there's a possibility of real fundamental change. It could be even worse, although it's hard to know how. We put for marijuana offense, people are serving 35 years in prison. It's hard for me to imagine anything much worse than these excesses of our criminal justice system. But it is a moment when change is possible. And to have both a vision of where we want to go and also have a way of moving forward, changing our own lives and changing systems, it's a start in the right direction. And everyone comes to law school in the United States. At least part of the motivation is to build a more just society. That's one of the reasons they come. A lot of them the reasons are mixed. That's one of them. How can we strengthen that? How can we support people in that goal and give them a way to move in that direction? It's, I think, a great gift. Thank you for the question. You had a question?
Also, on that note of the more just society, starting with yourself towards that change. So I've been raised with the Sufi practice, and a large part of that is the training of the ego. So it's not only the stepping back and the taking time, and like you said with the judge, not judging immediately, but allowing yourself to be humble and accepting what's coming to you. But also, so the process that has for yourself, the training of your ego in that, is that something that you have experienced throughout your practice, and is that something that you involve in the teachings you give?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. It is something that is implicitly and explicitly part of the work I'm doing. Implicitly because our meditation practice is inviting us to be less rigidly clinging to our ego, to our sense of ourselves. Instead of a thought coming up in our mind and saying, yes, that's my thought, and I'm really attached to that thought. It's either that's the reason I'm a Democrat, or that's the reason I'm a Republican, or your range of parties. We don't do it that way. We say, instead, we watch it with interest and we let it go. And that, I think, helps to loosen up this sense we have of clinging to who we are. And I think the practice, the longer we do it, the more we take on this discipline, the less we are. I mean, we're really starting a discipline when we take this seriously. A daily practice, for example, even if it's just 10 minutes a day at the start. We are really starting a discipline which is going to loosen up our attachments. And we do this exercise, opening the heart at the top of the mountain. When I was in law school, nobody talked about opening the heart for anything, at the top of the mountain or the bottom of the sea. So one of the things I love about the Qigong, because this is one of the first movements that I learned, and I love doing this with a class of law students. Let's open our heart. Feel your heart open. And then relax. Let that feeling flow through your body. So this is, and I'm sure the Sufi practice is a beautiful practice, and I'm sure you've gotten it very systematically. But that's certainly one of the directions we're moving in, I think. Thank you.
Could you say something about the ethical consequences of mindfulness? I mean, you implied something about that, but...
Thank you. Let me just give you a couple of thoughts about this. The way we teach mindfulness, we try always to connect it to some ethical norms. And I think that's the natural inclination of mindfulness practice. In my experience, meditation naturally opens us up to a sense of interconnection with other people. As we start to recognize what the complications and stresses of our inner lives are, we come over time to realize that they aren't just our quickness to anger, or our anxiety, or our prejudicial feelings about other individuals or about whole classes of people. We all have to acknowledge that those are inside us. And then we come to realize those are inside everybody. And that we can have a kind of empathic connection to people, even though we don't know them. And once you've started to spread the empathic connection, it's really hard to draw the limits and the boundaries. So that fundamental ethical norm of recognizing the interconnection of everyone, of all people, is implicit in this. I would also say this, that as we continue in this practice, we start to see what a high price we pay in terms of ongoing discomfort and internal pain from our unethical actions, which makes us more inclined to act in an ethically responsible fashion. So I think those are two of the dimensions of this. Now, you might say, well, is it possible for a really bad person to engage in this practice and be just as bad even after doing this practice? I think the answer is yes. And I think that the vector is moving in this other direction, which is, I think, a deeply ethical, and at this time in the world's history, a particularly urgent capacity to see ourselves in others and others in ourselves. I had the experience about a month ago of sitting for 3 hours with a group of prisoners, serious prisoners, many of them life prisoners. The average time in prison was 25 years that each of these people had been there. And they'd been doing a meditation program for almost a year. There's a year-long program at San Quentin, the federal prison closest to my home, where they have something like 5,000 prisoners. And this group of men had been doing this meditation practice with discussions weekly. And the level of ethical self-understanding and ethical commitment was simply astonishing to me. The way they spoke of their crimes and the harms that they had done to the victims and the harms they had done to the family and the people they had let down. This wasn't self-conscious play acting before a parole board. This was among themselves with a couple of visitors like me. And it was beautiful to see and to think that this change had been... And one guy got up and he said, a tough-looking guy, really tattoos and really tough. And he said, if anybody had ever told me that I would break down in tears in front of this group of people, and he points around to this group of people, he said, I would have thought they were crazy. He says, that's what we do in these meetings all the time. So, the idea of opening their hearts. These were people whose hearts had been opened by this practice. It was astonishing. It was really astonishing. And the extent to which they were willing to take responsibility for what they had done wrong. They didn't blame anybody for it. And they supported each other. These guys, one guy who had killed a woman talked about his crime, and another guy in the circle says, don't talk about yourself as if you're not worth anything. You did one terrible act. That act doesn't define who you are. You know, he had just read a letter. He says, this letter you read was so beautiful, I was in tears. So that's the possibility. The feedback I get from our students is amazing to me. I'm wandering a little from the subject of ethics, but I just happened to check out on this machine before I came over here. I do a 4-week introduction to mindfulness course. Again, I'm not telling them they know what mindfulness and law is, just saying this is an introduction. We do it starts in the first week of law school, when they haven't thought about what it means to become a lawyer. So we get an early crack at them. But it's only 4 weeks. They have a 2-hour class and a daily meditation practice for that 4-week period. I'm just going to read you a couple paragraphs from one of the students who just finished this course. I don't know where to start this reflection, she says. I'm astounded by the changes I've seen in such a short period of time. I have always considered myself someone who struggles with anxiety, but somehow starting law school has been one of the least stressful and most enjoyable times in my life. Yes, self-doubt and stress have crept into my mind over the course of the past 4 weeks, but I have miraculously been able to watch them float away. I'm just stunned. Isn't that amazing? And then I'm going to give you a little more of what she says. She's particularly articulate, but this is by no means exceptional. Aside from my deep gratitude and appreciation of the place I'm in, I've noticed similar themes emerge in this course, conversations with student groups, and the public interest community at the law school. People are emphasizing the importance of empathy, human connection, and interestingly, forgiveness in the legal profession. Intuitively, this obviously makes sense, but I take great comfort in knowing that I'm part of a community that values these concepts. Well, I won't go on. Something is being touched in these people. And it's wonderful to see. So.
Is this already the discussion part, or?
Pardon?
Is this already the discussion part?
This is the discussion part. Oh, yeah.
Because I just wonder, because of course we should all start with ourselves, but it seems like working with prisoners, judges, whoever, implementing mindfulness in their professional lives or personal lives at an maybe older age, isn't it more useful to use our energy and teach mindfulness to all the children? And start with education and, well, maybe starting a course there, or...
Well, yes. The answer is yes. I think starting with education, which is one of the things I'm doing, is, you know, when I'm working with law students, I'm making a commitment to the next generation of lawyers. What's lovely to see in the United States is a real flowering of mindfulness teaching in kindergarten and grades 1 through 8. Wonderful programs. And I'm glad you mentioned that. The dean of our law school, whom I wasn't sure whether she was really a supporter of our program or not, she said what brought her around to mindfulness, her first introduction to mindfulness, was that her children were in school in Oakland, California, and in kindergarten they were being taught to take the mindful moment. That's how they taught it. They didn't sit as we did for 10 or 15 minutes. They were taught when a fight is about to start in the schoolyard to say, one person says, let's take a mindful moment. And they take 3 deep breaths together. And we've been watching this program over the years, and the teachers say it's just changed the atmosphere in the classroom. And the dean was sufficiently moved and impressed by what her children were getting, so that she did this 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course, so that she'd be able to bolster them and support them and bring it forward herself. Now, has she brought it forward in her life as a dean? I'm not clear on it. But the point is, I think that's a very important message, and it's one that people are responding to. And there are two interesting phenomena I want to tell you about. One is in the United States Congress, in the House of Representatives. The other is in Parliament in Britain. In Parliament in Britain, there is a mindfulness caucus. There are 50 MPs who meet weekly. I'm sure they don't all show up every week, but in principle, they're committed to do this mindfulness practice in their work as MPs. And that, of course, includes a commitment to bring mindfulness into the public school system. And in the United States, there's a wonderful member of Congress from Ohio who wrote a book called Mindful Nation. And he talks in that book about how mindfulness can be embedded in legislation so that the various institutions, the schools, the courts, the welfare system, how they all can have a mindfulness grounding and foundation. Can I point to any legislation that's passed already? No. But it's a conversation that's going on that is mind-boggling. I'm hoping to meet this guy in London who's the head of the MP, who's the head of the Mindfulness Caucus. So
it would make sense that you start at such a young age. We wouldn't have to fight the symptoms of not being mindful anymore.
Well, and in the United States, they talk about a schools to prison pipeline, because there's something like a pipeline that goes from our inner city poor schools, where we have the largest immigrant population and the most underserved families, that starts them in kindergarten and has them on a track that's going to lead them into prison. And one of the ways that people are talking about breaking that pipeline is by introducing mindfulness along the way. It's going to take a lot more than that, but it's something that we can do. I want to say one other thing that's moderately closely related to that. Thich Nhat Hanh, one of the great teachers in these traditions, is a Zen priest from Vietnam who wrote a book called Being Peace, and who really certainly woke me to the notion that you can't effectively work for peace unless you can be peace. That a peace movement that's grounded on rage and fear is doomed to fail. That's a good one. So that I think one interesting area for doing this mindfulness work is to work just with the activists, the people who are most committed to social change, and see if they can find another foundation for their activism than fear and anger.
Perhaps this is only a question of semantics, but can you say something about the relation between meditation and mindfulness?
The relationship between meditation and mindfulness. As I said before, there are many different types of meditation. And there are some people who think meditation is about attaining individual enlightenment. This is a Buddhist notion. It's a wonderful notion, and lots of people, some of my teachers, really are into it for that reason. They want to be enlightened, and they want to help not only be enlightened themselves, but to help everyone become enlightened. That's one kind of meditation, and one goal of meditation. My goals are much simpler. I mean, much closer at hand. Not simpler, but I am interested in meditation for the purpose of increasing the amount of mindfulness of each practitioner, and also mindfulness in social institutions. And again, there are many, many different forms of meditation, actually the form of what you do, but also what the goals are, how it fits into a kind of a framework. I see mindfulness being the state you're in of equanimity, being grounded, being present, being open, being non-judgmental, being compassionate to yourself and to others. And meditation is the way you get there. And this kind of meditation focusing on the breath, focusing on attention, is well suited, I think, to cultivate those qualities.
Earlier today, you told us that at Berkeley you are developing a criminal defense system which is based upon mindfulness, or which incorporates mindfulness. How? I mean, a warrant is a warrant, and a sentence is a sentence. And so can you give an example of the thoughts you have, how to do that?
Let me be clear that we're talking about thoughts and aspirations at this point. Thoughts and aspirations. I know there's some prosecutors here, and certainly in our system anyway, in the prosecutor's office, a great deal of decision-making goes into what crime will be charged. A particular act might be charged as first-degree murder or second-degree murder or manslaughter or involuntary manslaughter. So if a prosecutor is approaching that question from a place of mindfulness, she or he is going to look at that question of charging from a point of view of first starting looking at the implications of the charge for a very large community. You've got a victim who was taken out of her or his community, and that community has suffered, and you've got an accused person who comes from a community, and that community is going to suffer if that person is pulled out. So there is a decision. How are you going to charge the case? So that's the first question for the system as it is now. The prosecutor makes that decision. Is that close enough to what goes on here so that... Then if we look a little ahead, we have a system that people are starting to experiment with called restorative justice. I understand there's something like that going on here too. And the idea there is you take the case out of the courtroom altogether, and you have the communities that have an interest in the offense and also in the resolution. And you try to find a way that does the most to restore the communities as can be done. And it doesn't look like a trial anymore. You have a kind of a conversation, a dialogue between the victim and the victim's families, and the perpetrator and the perpetrator's people in the perpetrator's community, and a public voice as well, represented by a prosecutor perhaps, or a court-appointed mediator, or something like that. But you can think about a whole procedural system that is grounded in mindfulness. And then, of course, when you think about what goes on in a prison, is that, these used to be called correctional facilities. They still are called correctional facilities, but it's a joke now. They aren't designed to correct anybody. They're designed to punish and incapacitate people. So you say, well, what if we really wanted to turn people out of these institutions who are able to deal with the world and deal with the offenses they've committed and want to create a new life? That would be a mindfulness approach to the prisons. And you have a system of restoring people to their communities where you don't just give them $10 and a bus ticket when you let them free from the prison, but you really try to think of a way that you can put them back into a useful, socially engaged life. But this is, we're at the beginning of this process. And it seems, to me, really important and worthwhile. I'm trying to raise money for that criminal justice process right now. That's what I'm going to do when I go back to my room. One more question or comment? Is this going to work? I don't want anybody to be strangled in the process, Cassandra. We have time for 2 more questions.
Thank you for your lecture. You mentioned right at the start also a goal outside of these broader benefits, just being an effective and sustainable law practice on a personal level. So I was wondering, because I think this has to do with time management and health, and I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that and how we can use mindfulness in those areas.
Well, in terms of time management, which is such a critical matter for professionals, the first thing that most people were confronted with the idea of meditation say is, I just can't fit it into my schedule. Where am I going? You say you can just do 10 minutes a day. Where am I going to get 10 minutes a day? This was my take for a long time. Much less, you want me to go on a 10-day meditation retreat and be in silence.